When I got out of the hospital, I didn't expect a celebration, but I sure as hell didn't expect betrayal. 40 years I spent fixing that truck. My truck. The same one Linda and I drove across Texas. The same one I kept running long after she passed, just to feel close to something that still remembered her. And while I was laid up with tubes in my arms and machines breathing for me, my son sold it. No call, no visit, just a receipt waiting for me on the kitchen table. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about a truck. It was about respect. And if he thought I'd just sit back and swallow it, he didn't know the man who raised him. I'll never forget the way the garage smelled when I came home that day. Gasoline, motor oil, the sharp tang of old metal and dust baked into the concrete. It wasn't just a smell. It was a memory. A whole damn history soaked into those oil stains and rusted tools. 40 years of wrenching on the same machine, the same bolts, the same body panels. A 1978 Ford F-150, dark blue with a silver stripe down the side. Linda used to call it our second home, back when we were still young enough to sleep in the cab during road trips. When the heart attack hit, I didn't think about the truck. I thought about her. I thought about how she always insisted I eat more greens and how I always waved her off. I thought about the way she'd smile while pouring sweet tea on hot summer afternoons, her fingers brushing mine. The real pain wasn't in my chest that day. It came after. It came when I made it out of the hospital and found the space in the garage empty. Not just missing. Hollow. Like something had been ripped from the bones of the house. There was a receipt on the kitchen table. Plain paper, clean ink. One of those carbon copy things with the imprint of every letter pressed deep into the fibers. I stood there still wearing the discharge bracelet on my wrist, reading the words, private sale, vehicle, 1978, Ford F-150, paid in full. It had my son's signature at the bottom, sharp and hurried, just like his temper. My legs gave a little, not from the heart, but from the heat that surged up through me. I held onto the back of the chair, steadying myself, trying to believe it wasn't what it looked like. But then he walked in, all calm, like it was nothing. "Dad," he said, "we needed the money." No apology, no warning. Just those 4 words like they explained everything. Like that truck was a luxury, like it wasn't a piece of my damn soul. "You didn't ask," I said, voice low. He shrugged. "You were in the hospital, Dad. We weren't sure if you were coming back. We figured it was time to let go of things. Let go of things. Things. I spent 40 years rebuilding that truck, repainting the body, replacing the timing chain, fixing up the transmission twice. Linda and I drove it across Texas the year before she passed, slept under the stars in that truck bed, woke up to the sound of cicadas and the smell of mesquite. And he called it a thing. I didn't yell, didn't scream. My heart couldn't take it, literally. I just stood there, quiet, staring through him. He started explaining more, said he and his wife were remodeling the kitchen and needed extra funds. "You'll love it, Dad," he said. "We did it for you too. It's more accessible now. Open floor plan, no more sharp corners, safe. Safe." My truck was gone, but thank God the kitchen was safe. I walked past him, into the garage. Maybe some part of me hoped he was lying. But no, the space was bare. The outline of the tires was still there in the grime, like a chalk drawing around a body. The pegboard where I kept my wrenches, empty. The old coffee can full of extra screws, gone. I sat on the workbench stool, not because I was tired, but because I didn't trust my legs to hold me up anymore. I didn't cry. I just breathed in that stale air, in the scent of gasoline that still lingered like a ghost. Linda used to say, "A truck is just a truck, Richard. Don't let it own you." And I'd nod, but she never saw me late at night sanding the tailgate, whispering stories to the metal like it was part of her. That truck outlived her, outlived most of my friends, and in one decision, one thoughtless act, he erased it. I stayed in the garage for a long time that day. Didn't even realize how dark it had gotten. My son didn't check on me. He figured I'd adjust, that I'd move on. But I knew something then, sitting there in that hollow space. I wasn't just grieving the truck. I was grieving the last piece of my old life, the life where I was a husband, a father, a builder. Now I was a man with a scar on his chest, living in a house that didn't feel like his, eating in a kitchen he never asked for, staring at an empty garage. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. The new kitchen tiles felt cold under my feet. Too modern, too perfect. No soul. My eyes landed on the receipt again. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of my flannel shirt. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. My son had made a decision for me. Now it was my turn to make one for myself. I stepped into the garage like a ghost walking into his own grave. The echo of my boots against the concrete was too loud for a space that used to hum with life. That garage had been my cathedral, my sanctuary. It was the place I came to think, to fix, to grieve when Linda passed, to tinker when the world outside made no damn sense. Now it felt like a crime scene, and the body was missing. The oil stains were still there, like scars on the floor where the F-150 used to rest. I crouched down, slowly, knees creaking, and ran my hand over one of them. Still sticky. That told me it hadn't been long. My son hadn't even waited for the fluids to cool before he gutted this place. The pegboard on the wall where I'd hung every tool in perfect order was stripped bare. The outlines of my wrenches were still there in dust shadows, a crooked ghost lineup. The red toolbox I'd had since '85 was gone, drawers emptied, wiped clean like it never mattered. But it did matter. That damn truck wasn't just metal and rubber. It was Linda's laughter in the passenger seat, her hand resting on my thigh during long drives. It was Sunday mornings with the windows down, country radio on low, and nothing but the road stretching out in front of us. It was hauling lumber for the porch she always wanted, or pulling neighbors out of snowdrifts every damn winter. And now, it was gone. Cashed in like a winning scratch ticket. No ceremony. No farewell. I sat down on the stool near the workbench, the one with the crack in the leg I always meant to fix but never did, and stared at the empty spot like it might change if I waited long enough. But it didn't. It stayed empty. The silence in that garage wasn't quiet. It roared. A few hours later, I walked back into the house. My son and his wife were in the kitchen, laughing over something on a tablet. When I stepped in, their laughter stopped like a needle yanked off a record. My daughter-in-law glanced up and gave me one of her tight, polite smiles, the kind that says, "This house isn't yours anymore," without using words. "You okay, Dad?" my son asked, not even bothering to look away from his screen. I didn't answer. I walked to the fridge, opened it, and stared inside for a long while. Not because I was hungry, but because I didn't trust myself to look at him without saying something that'd make the blood in my chest boil again. The shelves were full of things I didn't recognize: almond milk, gluten-free yogurt, something called kombucha. The hell had happened to real food? He finally spoke again. "We redid the kitchen. Looks nice, huh?" I turned around. His eyes were proud, like a child showing off a drawing taped to the fridge. "We used the money from the truck," he added, like it was a good thing. My eyes scanned the room. Granite countertops, stainless steel fridge, a digital thermostat blinking numbers like it ran a spaceship. Everything sleek and cold, everything expensive. "I haven't eaten in here once," I said. He laughed. "Well, maybe now you will." I didn't respond, just walked back out and grabbed a folding lawn chair from the shed. I set it right where the truck used to be and sat there in the garage for the rest of the afternoon, just breathing in the memory. Every little sound, the creak of the joists above, the rattle of the wind through the warped seal of the side door, reminded me this used to be mine. All of it. People stopped by over the next few days. Neighbors, church folks, even that teenager from down the block who I used to let help bleed brakes when he was 12. They'd say things like, "You're lucky to have family so close," or, "Isn't it nice having someone to take care of you?" I'd nod and smile and try not to show how hollow those words felt. Lucky. That word tasted like rust. Inside that house, I wasn't family. I was a tenant, a ghost they hadn't figured out how to get rid of yet. My son called me Dad, but it felt like a nickname he'd outgrown. His wife called me Sir, like I was some old veteran she had to respect out of obligation. And every thank you she offered was dipped in sugar and sharpened with teeth. I started staying outside more, first in the garage, then just out on the porch with a thermos of lukewarm coffee, watching squirrels fight over acorns, watching leaves fall, watching the street for something, anything, that didn't remind me of what I'd lost, but it always circled back to the truck. I couldn't get it out of my head, the sound of the starter catching, the little stutter in the idle that I never could quite fix but came to love, the way Linda's scarf still hung from the rearview mirror. I could still smell the lavender on it sometimes. I never told my son that. He wouldn't have cared. One night, I went out to the garage in the dark. No flashlight, just memory guiding me to the workbench. I opened a drawer that wasn't there anymore, reached for a socket wrench I knew had been in the top left corner for 20 years, and found air. Nothing. That's when I sat down on the floor, cross-legged like a kid in Sunday school, and I cried, not because I lost a truck, but because I let my life shrink down to the size of someone else's decisions. I let them decide what I no longer needed, what could be sold, what was just a thing. I sat there until the cold from the floor soaked into my bones, and then I stood up, wiped my face, and made a promise. Not out loud, not written down, but solid. If that truck was still out there, if it hadn't been crushed or stripped or turned into scrap, I was going to find it. And I was going to take back a piece of myself, even if it took everything I had left. After that first week, the visits started. They weren't planned. No phone calls ahead. Just people showing up at the door with Tupperware, old stories, and awkward smiles. Some came because they heard about my heart attack. Others came because they saw my son's social media post about bringing Dad home. Most came because small towns don't forget your name when you've lived in the same damn house for 40 years. They meant well, I think, but every knock on the door hit like an echo I didn't ask for. "Frank," said Ellen from church, holding a casserole dish like it was a peace offering, "you're so lucky to have family nearby. That boy of yours taking you in like that." I nodded and smiled, said, "Sure am," and took the casserole, set it on the counter and watched it steam like it belonged to someone else's dinner. They all said the same things. How blessed I was. How sweet my daughter-in-law was. How cozy my new room must be, tucked into the back corner of a house I used to own. What they didn't see was the way my son's wife labeled every jar in the fridge with permanent marker, her name on half, his on the other. Nothing labeled for me. What they didn't hear was the sigh she let out every time I shuffled through the kitchen to get a glass of water, like my presence ruined the feng shui. She called me Sir, Never Frank, never Dad, just Sir, like a manager talking to a customer who stayed too long after closing. "Do you need anything, sir?" she'd ask with a tone that made the question feel more like a warning. The worst part? My son barely noticed. He was buried in his own world. Video calls, spreadsheets, some startup thing I stopped pretending to understand. We'd sit in the same room and not exchange a word. Just the soft click of his keyboard and the ticking of that new digital wall clock she'd mounted above the fireplace. No chime, just numbers changing. A countdown, maybe. I took to spending more time outside, set up my old folding chair in the garage, right where the truck had sat. Just sat there, morning to dusk, sipping bad coffee and staring at the space like I could will it back into existence. Sometimes the neighborhood kid, Tommy, would stop by on his bike. Said he used to see me drive that Ford when he was little. Said the rumble of the engine made his dog bark like hell. "Why'd you sell it, Mr. Franklin?" he asked one day. I didn't answer right away, just stared out at the street. "I didn't," I said finally. "It was taken." He blinked, didn't know what to say, then nodded like he understood something bigger than his years, and pedaled off down the sidewalk. Even Pastor Mills stopped by. Sat on the porch one afternoon with his Bible in one hand and lemonade in the other. He talked about God's grace, about forgiveness, about how the heart attack was maybe a wake-up call, a sign to let go of earthly attachments. I nodded and said the right things. But I wasn't letting go. Not yet. Maybe never. One afternoon, I was out front pulling weeds that didn't belong to me anymore, when a neighbor I barely knew strolled by with his dog. "That old truck of yours still around?" he asked. My head snapped up. "Why?" "Think I saw it yesterday," he said. "Driving past Main Street, near the hardware store. Same dent in the front fender. Same patch on the left seat." My blood went cold. "You sure?" I asked. "Positive," he said. "That thing's got character. You don't forget a truck like that." I stood there, mud on my knees, hands in dirt, and something like fire rising in my chest. I hadn't seen it since I came home. Hadn't even imagined it still existed in one piece. I assumed it'd be torn down, chopped up for scrap, or parted out like an old carcass. But this changed everything. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone else's hands on that steering wheel. Some stranger adjusting the rearview mirror, the one that used to hold Linda's scarf, her lavender one. I used to watch it flutter when the windows were down, catching the sunlight like a flag from another life. The next morning, I skipped coffee, just walked out, past my son's Tesla, past the front porch flowers his wife insisted on watering even though they always died. I walked to the sidewalk, hands in my jacket pockets, and just stood there, waiting, watching, maybe hoping. And just before noon, it happened. I heard the rumble first, faint, familiar, like a voice calling from a distant room. Then it turned the corner, that unmistakable growl of the V8, that sputter I never could fully tune out. And there she was, my truck. Same color, same build, same dent in the fender where I hit that damn mailbox in '92. But it wasn't me behind the wheel. It was a young guy, maybe mid-30s, with a woman beside him. They were laughing, like really laughing, the kind you only do when something feels right. They pulled into a spot outside the hardware store. I walked across the street without thinking. "Excuse me?" I said. The man turned. "Yeah?" I nodded toward the truck. "That's a fine piece of machinery." He smiled, real friendly. "Thanks. Bought it off some family over on Maple Drive. Guy said it was his dad's, but the old man didn't need it anymore." Maple Drive. That was my son's street. I stepped closer, nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the truck. "Take care of her," I said. "She's got a lot of stories." He patted the hood. "That she does." I smiled, but inside, something shifted. Not anger, not yet, just motion. The kind of quiet, steady movement that only comes when the past finds a way to speak again. I didn't sleep that night, not because of pain or age or bad dreams, but because I couldn't stop seeing it. My truck, rolling down Main Street like it belonged to someone else. I kept picturing that man's hand on the shifter, his boots on the same floor mats Linda bought me for our 20th anniversary. I imagined the woman next to him adjusting the mirror where her scarf used to hang, replacing lavender with lipstick and laughter. But it wasn't hate I felt. Not yet. It was something quieter, like grief dressed up as curiosity. The next morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee cooling in my hand and watched the neighborhood yawn into life. Trash bins rolled to the curb. Kids pedaled by on bikes too new to squeak. My son walked past me once, earbuds in, eyes on his phone, didn't even nod. Later that day, I went back into the garage, not to sit, not to mourn, but to search. There had to be something left. A receipt, a number, a scrap of info he overlooked. And then I saw it. A crumpled sales agreement in the bottom drawer of the old tool cabinet he hadn't bothered to clean out. The corner was torn, coffee-stained, but I could read just enough. Buyer, Mark L. Peterson. Address, Route 4, Box 17. Phone, smudged to hell. It was a start. I borrowed my neighbor's phone. Said I needed to make a quick call. Took me 5 tries to find the right mark. But when a young man's voice answered on the 5th ring and I said, "You own a blue '78 Ford?" He said, "Yes, sir," with the kind of pride you can't fake. I introduced myself, told him I used to own the truck. There was a pause. Then he said, "You the guy from Maple Drive?" "That's me." Another pause. "I've been meaning to reach out." That caught me off guard. He told me he and his wife had found a small notebook in the glove box, one I used to jot down mileage, repairs, trips. Said it was full of little stories, notes about Texas sunsets and Linda's favorite diners. He'd read it, all of it. Said it felt like the truck came with a ghost in the passenger seat. I smiled. She did. Then he asked if I'd like to come see it again. My throat tightened a little. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." His house sat on the edge of town, gravel driveway, wind chimes, a rusted mailbox that leaned just enough to have character. When I pulled up in my neighbor's car, the truck was parked out front, clean, polished, but still the same. And there it was, the scarf, still tied to the mirror, faded now, barely lavender anymore, but still hanging, still moving in the wind. He stepped outside with a wave. Late 30s, jeans and boots, arms tattooed with old engine schematics and scripture verses. His wife came out behind him, curly hair, paint on her hands, one of those aprons artists wear when they don't bother pretending the mess doesn't matter. "Mr. Franklin," he said, shaking my hand. "Mark, this is Claire." "Pleasure," I said, meaning it. We spent the next hour walking around the truck, hood popped, doors open, pointing at every little scratch and story. I told them how I patched the seat with duct tape one night in a thunderstorm outside El Paso, how Linda and I carved our initials under the dashboard during a roadside picnic, how the stereo only played FM when it rained, and how that made her laugh every single time. They listened, not like people being polite, but like people who actually cared, who understood that some things were more than just steel and rubber. Then Mark said something I didn't expect. "We're opening a place," he said. "Claire and I, cafe/workshop, themes classic cars and road trip culture. She'll run the front, art, coffee, community. I'll run the back, repairs, restorations, classes. Sounds like a dream, I said. It was, until that truck showed up. Then it started to feel like a calling. Claire laughed. That truck changed everything, even the name. I raised an eyebrow. Rust in memory, she said. That's what we're calling it. I chuckled. That's damn good. Would you? Mark hesitated, glanced at Claire. Would you want to help us? I mean, you know the truck better than anyone. You've got stories, experience, hell, you've got soul, and we want this place to mean something. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the truck, at the scarf, at the garage beyond them, still empty but full of promise. And then I said it. I'd be honored. That was the first time in years someone had asked for me. Not my money, not my space. Me. We sat on the porch and talked until the sky turned pink. Claire poured sweet tea in mismatched mugs. Mark showed me sketches of the cafe, a mural wall, a shelf for engine parts turned into art. I told them about Linda, about the road trips, about the time the truck stalled halfway up Dead Man's Hill, and she joked that if we died there, at least the view was nice. They laughed, not politely, deeply, and I realized, sitting there with two strangers who felt more like family than anyone under the roof I now called home, that maybe my son didn't just sell a truck. Maybe he freed it. Maybe he freed me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the new refrigerator in the hallway, its digital compressor kicking on and off like it was breathing beside me. Everything in that house was quiet, too quiet, like it was designed not to disturb anything, not even thought. But my mind wouldn't stop running. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's scarf, still hanging from the mirror. Saw the way Mark and Claire looked at the truck, not like they owned it, but like they inherited it, like it meant something. And in a way, it did. My son sold that truck for money he didn't need, to fund a kitchen remodel that looked like every other magazine page his wife drooled over. Stainless steel, touch screen, soulless. He sold memory for marble countertops. But Mark didn't buy a truck. He bought a story. And I realized, lying there in the dark, that maybe I couldn't get the truck back, not in the way I once had it, but maybe I could build something better, not from scratch, from the same bones, the same heartbeat, a second life for something they tried to bury. That's when the idea hit me. I'd spent too long mourning, too long being still. What I needed now was movement, something forward. I wasn't just going to sit in a lawn chair staring at an empty garage. I was going to fill it again, not with steel, but with meaning. The next morning, I called Mark. "You still serious about needing help?" I asked. "Absolutely," he said. "You've got time?" "All I got is time," I said. "Let's make it count." So we got to work. Every morning, I left that cold house before sunrise, slipped out the back so I wouldn't have to hear my son pretend he cared, drove my neighbor's beat-up Toyota until I could afford better. And every day, I showed up at the shop. At first, it was just an old warehouse, concrete floor, broken windows, and dust thicker than sin. But Mark had vision, and Claire had fire. She painted while we cleared space. He sketched floor plans on plywood sheets. I found myself doing what I'd always done, measuring twice, cutting once, and telling stories while my hands moved. We pulled the truck into the center like it was an altar. Claire painted a mural around it, a desert highway, endless sky, ghost trails of memory fading into the distance. I stood beside her once, watching her blend the blues and oranges, and she said, "I've never painted something that felt like it could speak back." "It does," I told her. "You just have to listen." We cleaned up the engine, not too much, just enough to let her purr. Mark wanted to keep the scars, the dent in the fender, the patch in the seat. "Honest," he said. "People can smell fake from a mile off." He was right. Over time, people started showing up. Not just friends, strangers. Curious folks who heard about a place where every cup of coffee came with a story. Veterans, gearheads, lonely people who didn't want to drink alone in silence anymore. We called it rust and memory. I spent my afternoons teaching Mark how to rebuild carburetors, how to diagnose engine knock by ear. He taught me how to use a tablet. Claire made me business cards. "Resident historian," they said, with a little drawing of the truck in the corner. But this wasn't about legacy. This was about revenge. Not the kind that tears people down. The kind that builds something in spite of them. You see, my son thought he'd made a choice for me. Closed a door, signed a page, erased 40 years with a pen stroke. But what he really did was open another door. One he couldn't see, because he was too busy chasing things that shine without meaning. I didn't tell him about the cafe, didn't invite him, didn't bring him in. He never asked, and that felt right. He'd call sometimes, mostly to check in on my meds or remind me to log into some health app I didn't care about. He didn't ask where I went every day, didn't notice the grease on my hands, the way my back straightened when I walked through the door at night. That part of my life was invisible to him, and that suited me fine. One night, I was locking up the shop when Mark asked, "You ever gonna tell him?" "Tell him what?" "That you're happy." I smiled. He wouldn't believe me. Mark handed me a cold soda, clinked the glass bottle against mine. "Well, we believe you," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's burden. I felt like a man again. Back at the house, the lights were dim, the TV buzzing some reality show I couldn't stand. My son's wife was curled on the couch like a cat in a showroom. My son glanced up when I walked in. "Long day?" he asked, disinterested. I shrugged. "Busy." He nodded, returned to his laptop, probably spending my truck money on more brushed nickel fixtures. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't his home anymore, and it sure as hell wasn't mine. My home was out there, on that concrete floor under a painted sky, next to a truck that remembered everything he tried to forget. The plan wasn't done, but it was working. It started with music. Just a scratchy old jukebox that Mark found at an estate sale. Busted, dusty, barely upright. The kind with real buttons you had to press with intent. He wheeled it into the cafe one Saturday morning like it was treasure. "She needs love," he said, grinning. "Figured you might know how to give it." I did. Took me 3 hours and a bloody knuckle, but when I dropped in a quarter and heard Johnny Cash roll out of the speaker like he was walking through the front door himself, something shifted in the air. The room felt fuller, warmer, more real. That was the day the garage stopped being a project and started being a place. Claire painted the walls with road maps, snippets of Route 66, and ghost towns we'd never seen but somehow remembered. Mark built a long wooden table out of reclaimed fence boards, each one sanded by hand, every groove still carrying stories we didn't need to know. Customers started showing up before the grand opening, curious folks mostly, drawn in by rumor and the smell of sawdust and espresso. And the truck? We parked her near the entrance, not roped off like some museum piece, but right there under the lights, like she belonged. Claire strung soft bulbs above it and hung Polaroids from a wire, pictures of the rebuild, photos of me and Mark elbow-deep in grease, one of Linda and me from back in '81, her smile brighter than the chrome bumper. The scarf stayed on the mirror. We kept it there like a signature. Every morning, I opened the doors before the sun climbed past the silo. The first thing I'd do was touch the hood of that truck, not for luck, but for grounding. It reminded me where I came from, reminded me what had been taken and what I'd built in its place. People came in waves, veterans who missed the roar of a real engine, retired mechanics with crooked fingers and long stories, young couples who didn't know a carburetor from a cup holder but liked the feel of the place. We didn't just serve coffee, we served memory. Sometimes I'd sit at the table with old-timers and talk shop while Mark ran tune-up clinics in the back. Other days, Claire would ask me to share a story of the day for the cafe chalkboard, something short, something true. June 1990. Linda made me drive 60 miles out of the way for a piece of pie she saw on a billboard, worth every damn mile. People started reading them like scripture. We sold coffee mugs with the truck's silhouette. Claire turned leftover engine parts into art, pistons into candle holders, brake drums into flower pots. Mark installed a tool rack on the back wall and labeled every wrench by name, not size. Old Faithful, the Knucklebuster, Third Time's the Charm. It was silly. It was perfect. And I belonged. I stopped sleeping in so late, stopped dragging my feet. My hands ached less. My back stood straighter. I felt alive in a way that no pill or doctor's appointment ever gave me. I had purpose. I had people. And for 6 months, not a word from my son. Not a visit. Not a call. Not a text. At first, I took it as confirmation that I'd made the right decision, keeping my new life private. But over time, it became more than that. It became clarity. I realized something. He never wanted to know me. Not really. He wanted a version of me that didn't interfere, didn't question, didn't remind him of who he used to be before money and image took over. I didn't resent him. Not anymore. I just didn't need him. One day I found myself standing in the garage, not the cafe, the actual garage back at the house. I'd gone in to grab something from my old tackle box. The air felt different, stale, smaller. The oil stains were still there, but they'd faded. The pegboard was dusty, untouched. It felt like a shell, a monument to a man I didn't recognize anymore. I walked out, got in my neighbor's car, and drove straight to the cafe. Mark was under a lift. Claire was arranging postcards by the register, and I just stood there a minute, watching them, watching us. This wasn't about rebuilding a truck anymore. This was about reclaiming the version of myself that remembered how to build, not just things, relationships, community, respect. Later that week, Claire suggested something unexpected. You ever thought about telling your story? Writing it down? I laughed. Why? Nobody wants to read about a bitter old man getting even with a granite countertop. She smiled. That's not the story. The story is how you turn that bitterness into something people come here to feel. It stuck with me. That night I pulled out one of her sketch pads and started jotting down memories. Not for a book, not for money, just for me, for Linda, for the truck, for anyone who ever lost something and thought it was the end, when really it was just the start of something better. And through it all, one thing kept me steady. The smell. The mix of gasoline and espresso, dust and dreams, old oil and new hope. That's how I knew the garage had been reborn, not the one my son gutted, the one I built without him. We opened on a Sunday, not because it made business sense. Claire's spreadsheet said Thursdays would have been better, but because Sunday was the day Linda and I used to drive just for the sake of driving. No destination, no rush, just the hum of tires on asphalt, her humming along with the radio, and the quiet kind of love that doesn't need words. So we picked Sunday. Figured if it started right, it'd carry. That morning, the cafe was buzzing before we flipped the sign to open. Locals leaned on the hood of the truck out front, sipping from thermoses like they already belonged there. A couple of teenage boys argued over which muscle car had the best engine note. An older man with a Vietnam vet cap asked if we had black coffee that doesn't taste like burnt milk, and when I said yes, he grinned like I'd handed him gold. We didn't just serve drinks, we served stories. Each table was a piece of reclaimed wood, sealed but still rough, like they'd seen storms and held firm. Claire had printed photos of old Texas highways, Polaroids of my truck, and even a few snapshots of Linda, all tucked in the edges of the wall like secrets waiting to be found. People noticed. They'd stop mid-sip and say, "Is that your wife?" Or, "Where was this taken?" And I'd tell them. Not a rehearsed script, just the truth. About the time we broke down in Pecos and Linda made a picnic out of gas station snacks. About the night we watched fireworks through the windshield in San Antonio. About the miles, the years, the rust that never stopped us. Mark ran the back like it was a pit crew. Quick hands, grease under his nails, always smiling. He tuned up old bikes for free and charged next to nothing for oil changes, just because he said, "If people trust us with their rides, they'll trust us with their stories." He was right. By the end of the first week, Rust and Memory wasn't just a name. It was a rhythm. You'd walk in and hear someone saying, "My dad had a truck just like that," or, "We used to take this road out past Lubbock." And suddenly 2 strangers were sharing a booth like old friends. And me? I was there every day, first through the door, last to lock it. I wiped tables, fixed creaky chairs, retold stories like they mattered, because they did. People started calling me Mr. Frank, and for once, it didn't feel like a formality. It felt like respect. I never brought up my son, not to anyone, not even to Claire or Mark. They didn't ask either. They knew enough. But I'd be lying if I said I never wondered. If he knew. If he cared. If he'd ever come around and see what he'd thrown away. The difference was, I didn't need it anymore. One afternoon, I stood by the truck while the sun dipped low and painted the cafe windows gold. A young woman walked up, maybe 25, with a sketch pad in her hand. She stared at the truck like it had spoken. "You mind if I draw it?" she asked. "Be my guest," I said. She sat on the curb and started sketching. Quick, sure strokes. I leaned against the fender, watching. "It belonged to my wife and me," I said after a moment. She paused, looked up. "She's still with you?" "In a way," I said, nodding toward the scarf. She smiled softly and kept drawing. That night, I closed up alone. Claire had gone home early to paint. Mark was with his kid at a school play. I locked the front door, turned off the lights, and stood in the glow of the jukebox humming out Patsy Cline. And I felt it. That quiet warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with pride or revenge. It was peace. I walked over to the truck, opened the passenger door, and sat inside. The seat still had that slight sag from years of use. I ran my fingers over the dashboard, over the initials I'd carved decades ago with Linda's keychain knife. F+L, inside a crooked heart. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. Her laugh, her perfume. The way she used to roll the window down and let the wind play with her hair. For a moment, I could almost hear her singing along with the radio. I stayed there for a while, until the jukebox clicked off and the silence returned. Before I left, I opened the glove box and tucked in a folded note. Just a few words. For anyone who finds this, every mile mattered. Next morning, the place filled up fast. Regulars brought friends. A biker gang rolled through and bought out half the pastries. Someone left a bouquet of wildflowers on the truck hood with no note. And still, no word from my son. I didn't mind. I had rebuilt what mattered, with my hands, with my stories, and with people who saw value where he saw clutter. He traded my past for cabinets and counters, but I built something that couldn't be sold. Rust and memory. And it was mine. It came on a Tuesday. One of those days where nothing feels urgent. The kind where the sky hangs in soft gray, no wind, no noise, like the world is holding its breath. I'd just finished restocking filters in the garage side of the cafe when I heard it. 3 knocks on the glass front door. Not hard, not timid, just there. I looked up and froze. It was my son, standing just outside the window, hands in his coat pockets, eyes sunken and bloodshot. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just waited. Behind him was his wife, arms crossed, her face tight like a purse that hadn't been opened in years. I walked over slowly, heart steady but heavy, and unlocked the door. He stepped in like a stranger walking into a room full of old photos he didn't expect to see. The moment he saw the truck, he stopped. His mouth opened a little, like he wanted to say something. Or maybe like something just hit him. Maybe it was the scarf still hanging from the mirror. Maybe it was the way it gleamed under the overhead lights, polished and proud, alive. "Dad," he said. Just that. Claire looked up from the counter. Mark stood in the garage bay, wiping grease from his hands. I gave them a quick nod, and they both quietly slipped out back. It was just the 3 of us now. I didn't offer coffee, didn't ask how they found me. I just waited. My son took a breath like he was bracing for bad news. "We lost the house," he said finally. "The mortgage. We were behind, and then some investments went south. The remodel drained more than we planned, and then the market." His voice cracked, just once, like he hated even hearing himself. I didn't move, just let the silence stretch. "We're staying at her sister's," he added, "but it's temporary, crowded, not easy." His wife said nothing, didn't even look at me. Her eyes were on the truck, but not in admiration. More like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had turned into a mirror. I nodded slowly. Then I walked over to the front counter and picked up the rag I'd been using to polish the chrome on the truck. Wiped my hands out of habit. Motion calms me. My son glanced around, took in the mural, the old jukebox, the photos on the wall. "I didn't know you owned this place," he said. "I don't," I replied. "I helped build it, like I once built something for you." He flinched. For a moment, he was that boy again, the one who scraped his knee on the driveway and looked to me for help. But that boy was gone, and the man in front of me, he was carrying things he couldn't name. "We made a mistake," he said finally, "with the truck, with everything." I didn't say, "I know." I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. Instead, I walked him outside. We stood in front of the truck, and I ran my hand along the fender, right where the dent still lived, proud and unhidden. "This is where you traded memory for a microwave," I said. He winced. "You didn't just sell a truck," I continued. "You sold trust. You sold the last thing I had that felt like home." His wife spoke for the first time. "We were trying to do what was best." I turned to her. "No," I said. "You were doing what was easy. There's a difference." The wind picked up, soft but cold. "I came here because we need help," my son said. "Not just money. We need something stable, something we can hold on to." He looked around again, really looked this time. At the cafe, at the people inside sipping coffee, at the mural that stretched across the back wall, a painted highway leading into a watercolor sky. He finally saw what I'd built. "Did you do all this?" he asked. "I did my part," I said, "and I stayed out of the way when it wasn't mine to own." He was quiet for a long time. Then, almost whispering, "I thought you needed me." I nodded. I did. For a long time. Until I realized that needing someone doesn't mean trusting them, and trust doesn't survive being sold for parts. He didn't argue, didn't make excuses, and that's how I knew he was finally listening. Claire stepped outside then, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She offered them like a peace treaty, her expression unreadable. I took one. He took the other. We stood there, 3 people wrapped in silence, steam rising from our cups, the smell of gasoline and espresso blending in the cold morning air. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. He came back the next day, alone this time. No wife, no coat, just him, standing outside the cafe like a man who forgot how doors work. I watched from inside, cleaning the espresso machine, not moving to open up early. I wanted to see what he'd do without me pulling first. He eventually knocked. Just once. I opened the door, let him in. He didn't speak, just nodded like maybe the words were waiting in his throat but hadn't gotten the memo. I poured him a black coffee. No cream, no sugar. He didn't ask for any. We sat at the corner table, the one by the window with the best view of the truck. He didn't look at me, just stared at it. "I think I messed up," he said. I waited. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought selling the truck, redoing the kitchen, it was just stuff. But it wasn't. He finally turned to face me. "It was yours. And I never asked." That part landed. It wasn't just that he'd sold something I loved. It was that he never gave me the dignity of a conversation. He decided my grief was disposable, that my memories were optional. "I didn't need your money," I said. "I needed to feel like I still mattered." He swallowed hard. I saw guilt in his eyes then. Real guilt. The kind that sticks. The kind you can't rinse out with apologies or favors. It was the first time in years he looked like someone who used to be my son. He cleared his throat. "Can I ask something?" "Go ahead." "Why didn't you tell me about this place?" I sipped my coffee. "Because it wasn't yours to know." He blinked. "I wasn't hiding it. I just stopped assuming you wanted to see me for anything besides my assets." I could tell that hit him too, the way his jaw tensed, the way his hands twisted the paper coffee cup until it nearly buckled. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "No," I said. "I just stopped hoping." He nodded, slow. Then he asked what I knew he'd been holding since he walked in. "Can you help us? Just until we get back on our feet." That moment right there, it would have been easy to gloat, to twist the knife, to remind him of the kitchen he gutted my memories for, the truck he flipped like a Craigslist post. But revenge doesn't always wear brass knuckles. Sometimes the cleanest strike is the one you don't throw, the one you hold, just long enough to make them feel how cold the air gets without you. So I set my cup down and looked him square in the eye. "I did once," I said. "I lent you trust. You sold it." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, then closed. "I'm not saying no forever," I added. "But right now? No, not today." He nodded, didn't get angry, didn't beg. "I get it," he said. "At least, I think I do." I stood and walked him to the door. We paused at the truck. He looked at the paint, now waxed and gleaming, at the dent still unapologetically dented, at the scarf. "She really loved this thing," he said quietly. I nodded. She loved the road more, the freedom, the fact that every mile meant something because we chose it. He looked down. "I didn't know how much I took," he said. "You didn't want to know." A long silence stretched between us. "I'm sorry, Dad." I believed him. But guilt doesn't restore what's broken. It just points at the wreckage and says, "Yeah, I did that." "I hope you fix things," I said, hand on the door. "Us? Your life." I held the door open. He walked out into the cold, hands deep in his pockets, shoulders heavy. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad. Sad for the time lost. Sad for the silence between us. Sad that it took failure for him to see the damage. But most of all, I felt something deeper. Relief. Because I hadn't lost myself. Not all the way. I'd rebuilt. With calloused hands and borrowed tools. With strangers who turned into friends. With a truck that should have been gone, but instead became something more. That night I added something new to the cafe. A small plaque, brushed metal, mounted just beneath the photograph of the truck's original registration slip. It read, "Not everything broken needs fixing. Some things just need to be remembered." When I locked the door and turned out the lights, I caught a glimpse of the plaque's reflection in the truck's side mirror. It shimmered, like truth. A month passed before I saw him again. It was a Saturday, mid-morning. The cafe had already started to fill with the usual crowd. Couples tucked into booths, retirees talking carburetors and grandkids, college kids pretending to study while letting the jukebox soundtrack their morning. I was polishing the front counter when the doorbell chimed. My son walked in, alone again. But something was different this time. He didn't look like a man coming to ask for help. He looked like someone trying to say goodbye without asking permission. He didn't speak right away, just walked the perimeter of the cafe like he was looking at it for the first time. He paused in front of the mural, then the photos, then the truck. His eyes found the plaque under the registration slip. He read it twice, then a third time. He didn't cry, but his jaw tightened the way mine used to when I had something to say and couldn't find the words that wouldn't embarrass me. Claire caught my eye from behind the pastry counter and gave me space. Mark stayed in the garage. They knew what this was. Finally, he turned to me. "I don't want money," he said. I nodded. I just wanted to see it again. This place, you, the truck, all of it. He stepped toward the truck and ran a hand along the tailgate like he was touching a photograph instead of steel. "I didn't get it before," he said. What it meant. What she meant to you. What it all was. He looked back at me. Mom would have loved this. That was the first time he said her name in months. I felt the breath leave me slow, not from grief, from something quieter, like finally setting down a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. "She would have," I said. We stood there a while, letting the hum of voices and clink of mugs fill the silence between us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A key. My key. The spare one to the truck I'd given him when he was 18. Just in case. The one I assumed had been lost or tossed years ago. He placed it on the counter between us. "I kept it," he said. I looked at it, then at him, then picked it up and slid it into my pocket. "Why now?" I asked. He exhaled. "Because for the first time I'm not coming to take. I'm coming to remember." We didn't hug, didn't shake hands. We just nodded at each other like two men on the edge of something fragile. Not repair, but recognition. He turned to leave, then paused at the door and pointed to the wall. "That new?" he asked, nodding toward the corner near the window. I smiled. There, freshly mounted in brushed aluminum, was the new sign Claire and I had designed that week. The one we debated about for days. Too sentimental, too on the nose, too long. But in the end, it felt right. It read, "In memory of the road we took and the ones we left behind." He stared at it for a long moment, then nodded once and stepped out into the cold. I watched him go, wondering what kind of man he'd grow into now that life had cracked something open in him. Whether the guilt would turn into growth or just fester. Whether he'd come back again, maybe with something else in his hands. Something more than a key. I didn't need him to, though. That's the thing about revenge. People think it's about getting even, about hurting someone back. But for me, it became about rebuilding the part of myself they thought was disposable. I didn't burn down his house. I built my own, and it stood taller than anything he ever made with my truck money. Later that evening, a customer asked if the truck still ran. I smiled and handed him a Polaroid from the box under the counter. A shot of the truck parked by the cafe at golden hour, the scarf in the mirror glowing like fire. He flipped it over. I'd written something on the back. She runs, and so do I. When I locked up that night, the lights from the street shimmered off the new sign. The cafe was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of stories, of miles, of people who walked in strangers and left, knowing a little more about what matters. I stood by the truck one last time before heading out, ran my hand along the hood, and whispered, "Thank you." Not just to her, but to myself, for surviving, for remembering, for choosing to rebuild instead of rot. Because the truth was, I hadn't lost my family. They had lost me, and that was the cost of forgetting what matters.